So one more time, I'm going to ask you guys, if you have not already, follow the directions in the orange box and change the name in your Zoom profile. That will really help us make sure we can make the appropriate groups at the end of today when you have time to collaborate with your peers. So welcome and thank you for joining us for our summer series for campus leaders. Our session is being recorded today, and so we will make that video available to you soon. Please feel free to share that video with anyone else from your team or other educators you know. Also, we ask that today you follow us on social media and post about your learning if you have something you want to share with others today. We will be extending our learning about positive student culture through a focus on effective instruction to ensure all students learn. If you're here with us today, you're part of a guiding coalition that leads the work on your campus. And today's learning will help you make decisions as you plan for your upcoming school year. In one of our June sessions, we shared 6 strategies for how to build and support a positive student culture. We did a deep dive and shared examples for several of these strategies. The video of that session can be located on our summer series resource page if you want to go back and watch that. The link is being added to the chat now. And today we are going to continue that learning on one of those particular strategies. The learning will be guided today by myself, Amy Havard, and Terry Clement. Letty Maynard will also be our moderator today. We're all part of the team at E3 Alliance, which is a nonprofit based in Austin, Texas. Terry and I are fortunate enough to support and partner with schools all over Texas, but we especially love having a chance to be here with you today. Today, we're going to start with the why and then learn exactly how to ensure all students learn through effective instruction. Then at the end, we'll have a breakout session for you to discuss what you've learned and draft some action steps. During our session, just remember these 3 things for success. Keep audio muted, take notes however you choose, whether that's on paper or digital, and know that we've added a link to a PDF of these slides in the chat so that you can follow along. Now, let's focus on the why. Why is effective instruction so urgent? Why is this so urgent? The COVID slide we keep hearing about is real. Some research is already noting that students are likely to retain only 70% of the gains they made last year. That's in reading. That number only increases, or I should say decreases, to 50% in math. In addition, we're all implementing new school systems and modalities that we'll need to teach to our students. Also, consider that we'll need to build relationships and focus on healing-based practices as much as possible throughout this difficult year. That's how we can ensure our students are ready to learn. All of that means we're going to have less instructional minutes overall than in previous years and more work to do with those minutes. So the work of effective instruction aligns with Lever 2 and Lever 5 of TEA's Effective Schools Framework. This means you're doing the right work when you focus on efforts to support effective instruction. To do this, we need to be aware that there is a misconception that might be held in some of your schools that will get in the way of efforts to improve. And that is the thought that school is an opportunity for students to learn. But we know better. The purpose of a school is not the opportunity to learn. The purpose of school is to ensure students learn. As educators, we have a moral imperative to do the right work we know how to do. Especially right now as we work together to reopen our schools and engage in our community of learners. This means we must understand the connection between effective instruction and a positive student culture. 2 big ideas we're asking you to consider today are 1, how a supportive learning environment is critical to effective instruction. And then 2, some ways to make sure we teach with urgency this fall. What do we mean by a supportive learning environment? Do your students know why they're there, what they're going to learn each day, or do they just see your course as a place where tasks are given and completed? Just like educators, students need meaningful learning experiences. Reflecting on some behaviors and practices that occur on your campus can really help you this year. You'll need to do a self-check. Look at the language that is used and how ensure you are putting connections before content. So starting with teacher language, the words you use with students will have a significant impact on whether or not they want to engage. That might be looking forward to entering your classroom at school or logging onto your video conference or virtual classroom. Using inclusive pronouns like we, us, and our when talking about students in a group can go a long way to making them feel like they belong there. Also, using specific language to build a growth mindset is critical to student engagement. Model and enforce a norm of saying yet behind any I can't or I don't know statement. I hear students all the time say, I don't know how to do this. And I always ask them to repeat, I don't know how to do this yet. Be conscious of praising actions and performances, praising actions and performance rather than the person. For example, telling a student, great job providing text evidence for that, instead of, you are such a great reader. Also, make your feedback very specific. For instance, you did a fantastic job of setting up this proportion with numbers and labels, instead of saying, you've improved, or you've gotten another one right. The founder of Capturing Kids' Hearts says, if you have a child's heart, you have their head. How can you do this at your school? First, ensure relationship building is something that you value. Make sure this is conveyed in your mission, vision, values, or commitment statements that are used by students and staff. Next, build time in your daily schedule for teachers to build relationships with students. You have to acknowledge that you will struggle to move forward as a whole campus if you allow the adults in your building to care for only the kids enrolled in their classrooms. Ensure the collective ownership for supporting all students through your language and leading. For example, we want to think about our kids, not my kids. Think about how teachers talk about students in PLC meetings. I have my kids do this, or why don't you do this with your kids? This is especially evident when we start to talk about planning for differentiation and flexible grouping. I want to have my kids in my advisory acceleration group, or I have some of your kids in my group. Next, you'll need to commit to campus-wide practices in order to make this happen in every classroom. You get that commitment, then you provide professional learning on how to do it, then of course, monitoring and supporting that commitment throughout the year. Also, model, encourage, and help your staff plan for healing-based practices. This could be listening lunches, wellness check-ins, anything that helps build the relationship and the conversation. These will help students feel supported and want to be there each day. We also know that ready-to-learn practices, positive behavior systems, are critical to connecting with kids. If they can't consistently rely on the environment and what is expected of them, they won't be able to trust. Make sure communication of expectations is clear in all classrooms. In addition to the work of building a supportive learning environment, the next step toward effective instruction to ensure all students learn is by engaging in the scope of the work for effective instruction so that you can teach with urgency. Terry's going to share some ideas about how to support that teaching with urgency this fall. Terry?
Thanks, Amy. Nobody will argue that we're all filled with urgency right now. School closures in the spring, uncertainty for the fall, and of course the dreaded COVID slide that Amy already mentioned, means that we have to focus on the most effective instruction possible. We know there's a set of evidence-based, research-based practices that work better than others. So we'll reach for those. But along with that, there's some instructional leadership moves that you as leaders can use to make sure the energy behind that urgency is getting guided into the right direction and the right work. So I'm going to go through these with you. So you may want to take your notes, but again, remember that along with your campus commitment to your instructional model, these components can really help get the effective instruction that your students need right now. Here's what we know. We don't have time to teach everything. Not all standards are created equal, and this year, again, we're going to be even more pressed for time because of factors beyond our control. But what we can control is the study and the selection of the essential standards. So first, we look at all the standards in a given unit. We study them collaboratively with a team of colleagues and instructional leaders. Then priority is given to standards by our curriculum system. The state kind of gives us some prioritization. Like in Texas, we have readiness versus supporting. Also, your own district's curriculum systems may have even more guidance. But you narrow that focus according to the time in your scope and sequence and consider which are the most important for understanding the course overall, the big ideas, and also which ones align with college and career readiness or real world readiness. Ultimately, what do they need to know? What do they need to understand? And what do they need to remember? As well, we want to engage with pre-assessments. And after those pre-assessments, we can use that to focus even further, narrowing the focus for the unit and getting straight to the instruction that the students really need. So here are some ideas about how to pre-assess students, some must-dos and how-tos. There are simply too many benefits to pre-assessment. I can't mention them all today, so I'll just get right to the most paramount of them being that it saves time, prevents new challenges from showing up. Plan now to use those pre-assessments in your practice. Give the pre-assessments well ahead of time so that you can use the results to make decisions, and only pre-assess after you have clarity on the standards, studying them yourself. When you give pre-assessments, make sure to keep them short, to the point, and on those focus standards. As well, you want to make sure that the mastery of students can show the mastery of those standards and that you're able to use the results to focus where the focus is needed, adjusting the unit lesson plans and creating personalized pathways for different students based on the results of the pre-assessment. Next, bring an acceleration mindset to your instruction. The concept of acceleration is deeply explained in a book by Susie Pepper Rollins, amazing book, but I'm not exactly saying suggesting that we change all of our systems right now, but instead bring the notion of acceleration to your practice, to your work. And here's the why. We can't afford to widen any gaps right now. Remediation can sometimes, just by its very nature of looking backwards, can sometimes increase gaps, and we don't have any time to waste. We must keep the learning relevant and motivation high. Here are some ways that you can bring the acceleration mindset to your work. Focus on those grade level current standards, the standards of the moment. How can you prepare students to be successful right now? Next, if they're missing prior knowledge or something they can connect the current grade level learning to, insert it for them. If they don't have an understanding of money, for instance, sixth graders we know will probably need to solve problems, or certainly will need to solve problems involving money. So plan to have some experiences with money before giving them abstract word problems to analyze, virtually or in person. This can be done. Big ideas can be pre-taught, especially for students who struggle. If they're in your room or in your virtual classroom, they can have introductory small group sessions with you ahead of time before the unit begins. You can work all of these in, but again, just bringing this mindset to your practice will help to make the instruction even more effective. Not necessarily about catching up, it's about catching on. Next, let's talk about well-matched learning experiences. I'm going to give you a minute to look this over. And remember, you have this in the slides in the file that was shared in the chat. Well-matched means that the learning in the classroom is at the level of the standard and ultimately how students will demonstrate mastery. So this is a process you can use as leaders to ensure the learning is matched to the level of the standard. Remember, when you access this, you can use part or all of this process, but it starts with a study of the standard and leads to a lesson that will get students to that level. To kind of take you through what I mean, I want to share a story with you. So I was fortunate enough to observe a fantastic lesson once. A sixth grade teacher during just tier 1 instruction had students moving all around the room in small groups and sort of a carousel, having conversations, giving feedback on posters that displayed all types of figurative language. The students were engaged, conversations were on topic, posters were visually pleasing. But then I started to look at the posters and I noticed that they included the name of a figurative language term, like metaphor or simile, the definition, and a few examples, along with a visual. I looked at the lesson plan and I noticed that the poster activity took several days. So this interactive, movement-rich, academic, conversation-laden, engaging activity was exemplary on so many levels and really enjoyed observing the lesson. And then I looked at the standard, which was there on the board in the room. The standard says that students will be able to explain how figurative language contributes to the meaning of the poem. So a few days into this, and the students in this activity have not gotten anywhere near that level of practice. So this was not a well-matched lesson. It was a great lesson, an engaging lesson, but not well-matched. That's a hard lesson for all educators to learn. I know I had some experience with that myself. So when we go to support well-matched lessons, make sure that you have a process to support studying the content, studying those essential standards, and getting the lessons where they need to be. I'm going to ask Amy now to continue with the last few ideas for how to ensure all students learn. Amy?
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. A focused set of instructional strategies will grow teacher capacity. Teaching with urgency will include selecting strategies that align with the campus instructional model, including a campus instructional playbook. This allows for us to focus on a few important things and get better at them together along with our colleagues. Not to mention, this supports student learning by giving them repeated practice with a set of shared strategies. Here's an example of a focused set of instructional strategies. This campus instructional playbook shows in a one-page document exactly which strategies should be used on a regular basis, exactly how to implement them, and then it goes on to provide guidance for how to implement them both in person and in virtual instruction. This means that this campus has made a commitment to implement Think, Pair, Share frequently and with fidelity. This shared document makes it clear that everyone knows the how of implementing the strategy so that observation and feedback cycles can align, no matter the modality, either in person or virtual. And they can provide support for effective teachers and effective instruction. So our world was turned upside down and school was virtual in the blink of an eye back in March, April, and May. We did as well as we could. We learned so much, especially about what was not happening enough in our classrooms. Some school leaders noticed that the biggest problem exposed was the lack of autonomous learning. Kids required their parents or other help in order to engage in their virtual lessons because they just had a habit of not being able to do it on their own. Students were too dependent on teachers for thinking, speaking, writing. So for the 2021 school year, effective instruction should include components that we know will support their autonomy, their capacity to learn. We'll need to design more experiences where students learn on their own with support and input from teachers. Think about the teacher as a facilitator or the teacher as a guide, not the teacher as the one doing the thinking in the classroom. The list on the right has a few examples of how to grow autonomy in students. First, communicating clearly so students can self-manage is developmentally responsive and also aligns with recommended practices to serve all students. Graphic organizers help students see the connections between content and make their own connections to other learning. Anchors, anchors, anchors. We can't say enough about them. Just know that we rarely see students raise their hand or struggle to get started if there's an authentic student anchor that they can use. Students collaborating is perhaps the most evidence-based practice there is. Google what to do for any student group, and this one is on the list because it helps them talk, process, and think without the teacher. Writing to learn is a powerful process that promotes critical, high-level thinking and especially retention. Chunking, taking those big projects or long assignments and breaking them into smaller tasks that are focused with strategic time limits, or chunking the right content together or apart to make it accessible. Both of these will support student success without you. Finally, partnering with students so they know what they're learning, where they are in the journey, and being able to monitor their own progress cannot be undervalued. It's critical to student independence and is again recommended for all student services you'll find. One thing that we need to keep in mind is that after this experience, we should not have the goal of returning to normal. We've managed to make some great strides towards student autonomy and making this part of our regular practice. So we need to keep moving forward and keep encouraging autonomous learners. Here's an example of a lesson plan for a virtual 1-hour synchronous lesson where everyone is learning together in a video conference with the teacher leading. Let's look for evidence of urgency. First, the learning is focused on one standard. It's a readiness standard aligned with real-world college and career readiness, and the pre-assessment results showed that this should be the focus. Next, the acceleration was provided in 2 breakout sessions the day before where concepts and vocabulary were pre-taught. Also, explicit vocabulary is activated for all students at the beginning of the lesson. Next, campus instructional playbook strategies are evident throughout the lesson. It's well matched as the students are engaged in the problem-solving process throughout the learning. And then, of course, autonomous learning support sequence is evident. There's gradual release, modeling, exemplars are provided, lots of anchors, and assigned asynchronous practice with feedback. All of these work together to build confidence and independence in our students. In addition to these ideas for the how of effective instruction, you'll find more resources for leading your school to reentry this fall through additional resources from E3. This week, we had our second webinar for the Road to Recovery Priority Playbook that helps guide school leaders with planning for the upcoming school year. The leadership moves that we've shared today are directly aligned with the plays of the Road to Recovery Priority Playbook. You can find out more by going to our resource page. The link is being put in the chat. In addition, we hope that you keep learning with us through these upcoming opportunities. You can register for part 3 of our Road to Recovery webinar that's happening in September. September will be a great time to check in to see how the first weeks of school are going and adjust or continue your planning from there. We also hope that you'll continue to join us for our summer series. Next week, we'll be talking about attendance systems. Thanks for learning with us today, all about ensuring instruction is effective and all students learn. Please share this recording and any other resources with other educational leaders you think would benefit.